Okay, everyone. So today we are actually going to start a recap of the Cold War, and we are looking at the origins as well as the development, and it is chapter 7 of our history notes. So every time we look back at any chapter, we are actually looking at what is the key knowledge, what is the learning outcome, and what are the key concepts. And especially, I think you should focus on the key concept. Okay, and the key knowledge, we actually have the SAB page. This is taken from the SAB page. So for chapter 7, and especially origins and development of the Cold War in Europe, we are looking at three main points. Okay, and this video will cover A as well as B. So if you look at A, we are looking at actually Cold War was the result of end of World War II and its impact on Europe. Cold War is also because of the growing mistrust between USA and USSR or Soviet Union. Okay, and Cold War was also resulted because of the intensification of superpower rivalry. Right, and what the objective is really about is about examine how Cold War was manifested. So the meaning of manifested is some of the examples that came up from Cold War. So as you can see, for easy reference, okay, this particular um, graphic infographic, okay, actually captures the reasons for Cold War. You have one, okay, end of Cold War here, okay, two, growing mistrust, intensification of superpower rivalry. So specifically what they can ask is they could ask out of these three, which one is actually the main reason for Cold War? Okay, and of course, for every point here, main point here, you do need to know the specific examples. So, if some of you are going to ask me, do you need to know everything? Yes, of course. Okay, because they can always ask you any of this given factor, and then you need to know specific examples for the given factor. Okay, so what is specifically Cold War? So Cold War is actually a very intense period, right, where there was confrontation and the word competition usually comes out between USA as well as the Soviet Union, and specifically it is when the threat of nuclear war was at the background of it, because we are talking about conditions that is after World War II, and there is this constant tension. So keywords here: confrontation, competition, due to the constant world tension. I think that is the one that is very important. So you also have countries like Soviet Union as well as USA. So it is, or I would say, a very real competition between both these two countries with very different ideological sets of belief. Okay, so we are going to go into the first given factor as well as the examples here. And one of the things that I would say you need to look at is really what was Europe itself? What was happening to Europe? Okay, so the end of World War II did take its toll on Europe. Okay, they were rebuilding itself from the damage. There was many infrastructures that were literally not there. I mean, they were going through a very intense fighting with Germany, and because of that, obviously the condition was not the best. Okay, and it led to this fundamental shift in the balance of power. All right, the old European powers such as Britain, such as France, and even Germany um, was really recovering after World War II, and because of that, there will be this void of power, and it did lead to Cold War tension. I think this is something that you really need to understand, that after the end of World War II, later on you'll see there's only two very specific superpowers left. Okay, so for the first example, under the given factor, alright, this is the part where I was telling you void of power as the main countries were no longer dominant. Okay, and these are the specific examples. All right, British, for example, one of the great superpower, they were facing this exhaustion of resources. All right, you can see this picture, specific picture on the right. France, which was actually occupied by Germany, it was no longer the superpower or the power that it had been. And of course, we have Germany that is in ruin. So once you have a country like this, obviously there will be problems. And especially because some of these countries were not very comfortable with having a very strong Soviet Union. So you can see in the aftermath, and the meaning of aftermath here is actually what is the result of World War II. And you can see a lot of red here, right? Okay, the specific original Soviet countries, the Eastern Europe here, and as well all these other countries that were eventually part of the bigger Soviet Union. And the second example under the given factor is actually the emergence of USA and as well as Soviet Union as a superpower. And do remember that USA, I would say, is always represented as an eagle, and then you have Soviet Union as a bear, and they look very menacing and they look equally powerful here. So what is the implication then? All right, the implication is because of this, there is this emergence of USA and USSR as superpowers, okay, meaning they are going to be, okay, the two superpowers that will actually possess enough economic strength together with military strength, and they are able to change the way the world is being controlled. All right, so that's why I like this particular cartoon. It is a balance of terror, and at the same time, um, United States was, remember, the last country that actually entered into the war, so they were the least affected, even in comparison to Soviet Union, and that's why they will always be the most, I would say, powerful country then, and perhaps the most powerful country now because of the sheer um, um, access to weapons, right? And both countries were able to actually exert a greater influence in the world stage. Meaning, if you look at the map here, you can actually see the extent of Soviet Union. Okay, you must remember that later on China also became communist. All right, and of course the extent of um, North as well as South America. So they are two superpowers. Of course, you have Africa here and you have Australia here, but you know Europe was just unfortunately recovering after World War II. Okay, so if we look at the link and we ask ourselves, was Cold War attributed to the end of World War II and its impact? I think one of the most important things that we need to learn as well as remember is um, always recap what is the meaning of Cold War. And Cold War is because of, again, tense relations, countries compete very fiercely, but they don't go to war. So keyword is competition. All right, and they compete in many areas actually to prove their superiority. So I would always start with the end of World War II and its impact caused Cold War as the powers shifted, right? And both sides were actually competitors, okay, and their relationship worsened. And of course, other countries were recovering from the damages of World War II. Both the two superpowers also forced their authority on other countries, and it led to the tension and complexity. And because they were competitors and because they were superpowers, they would eventually be divided into East and West. And when you have this division between East and West, it did result in Cold War. So that is how you can use the end of World War II and its impact and use it as a link. Okay, so we are going to go to the next point, which is actually growing mistrust between USA as well as Soviet Union. So when we talk about growing mistrust between USA as well as Soviet Union, we are looking at how previously they were alliance or they were part of the Allies, all right? But because of specific reasons, okay, there was this growing mistrust between USA and Soviet Union, and as it began to grow, what was the impact? Okay, how did this growing mistrust actually lead to Cold War? And of course, the first example of growing mistrust is actually ideology. So, ideology is really the way of being. That means it governs a lot of things, whether it is political, economic, social. It is really how a country thinks. Right, and there are differences between capitalism, which is predominantly USA, as well as communists. And if you look at the specific examples here, the way that they run their country is different. The way that they run their economy is different. Right, in USA, um, businesses are able to make money or they are free to set up businesses, private businesses, in fact, whereas in communist state, everything is owned by state, owned by the government. And even society itself, the amount of control. And if you look at the specific differences, and it's a very key difference, um, will this difference actually lead to Cold War? Why? Why not? So always go back again, recap. Um, it is about tense relations, right? It is about competing fiercely, right? It's about competing fiercely in many areas to prove that they are better. So the very fact that if Soviet Union adopts communism, whereas USA and some of the other countries adopts democracy slash capitalism, then you obviously can see that there is this competition by itself. All right, and the problem with these differences in ideology will then manifest, okay, will then actually spread into other areas. So when we talk about the differences, okay, in ideology, we are looking at how it spreads, right? And the examples of mistrust was interestingly before World War II. All of this, which we went through um, in our timeline, okay, and it also was, I would say, brought forward to all these key um, events specifically during World War II. So what I'm trying to tell you is that the differences in ideology um, made them sort of compete or made them sort of have issues with each other, right? And all of this was the result of this mistrust. Okay, ideology led to mistrust, and the examples of mistrust is as such. Now, the second example of growing mistrust is actually the breakdown of wartime alliance. Wartime alliance was specifically between allies as well as the Axis power, and you can see that by 1945, USA and Soviet Union already had a preliminary discussion. Okay, so you need to know more about this Yalta conference, okay, and how, for example, in Yalta, the leaders agreed on all these points. And in the Yalta, all right, it did reveal that there was actually tensions. Okay, Stalin obviously wanted to secure Soviet Union, but of course the European powers, the fear of a communist uh, superpower being developed after World War II was just terrible. And they also were very fearful that Soviet Union would take and control the whole of Poland. So these are things that happened, but they had no choice. Okay, as I was saying that they had no choice, right? Because they needed each other to still complete the war in Europe as well as Japan. So in May 1945, when the war is finally over and Germany is defeated, what was next? What was next was actually meeting at Potsdam. And in Potsdam, you can see that there was a shift. All right. Already, Stalin started building a communist government in Poland. Roosevelt passed away and was replaced by Truman. And of course, America already successfully actually tested the atomic bomb, but told Stalin about it much later. So you can see again, competition intensity was already brewing, right? And these were the terms at Potsdam, right? And it was important because it did reveal again the differences between Stalin as well as USA, and it did see this bullet point too. Develop tensions because Truman wanted free elections, but Stalin refused. It convinced Truman that Stalin wanted to take the whole of Europe, and it revealed a lack of trust between USA as well as Soviet Union. So you can see it was getting very aggressive then. So while the two superpowers were meeting and taking picture here, the underlying tension was actually very, very real. Now, it doesn't help that, of course, the bomb was actually developed. It was developed originally for Germany, but it was not being used, and it was being used in Japan instead. So there was this looming tension and fear. Now, the last example under mistrust was definitely division of Europe, and the two superpowers after the two conferences and the two meetings, you could see it was a race. It was a race of who could control Europe. And why were they able to control Europe or sort of increase their dominance? Because remember, for the first example, the impact of World War II on Europe, and Europe was literally recovering. And because of that, Stalin was determined to actually control as many Eastern European countries and sort of insist on a communist state. And because of that, Churchill, who was British Prime Minister during World War II itself, made this speech, this Iron Curtain speech. And in this Iron Curtain speech, it really seemed to indicate that Soviet Union was building this massive empire. So there was no curtain in Europe, but it was this figure of speech. Figure of speech means it's a symbol, and it's a symbol of having this big, huge divide, or this big, huge wall that separates Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, countries that sort of had no choice but to be part of Soviet Union, or they choose to be part of Soviet Union, and countries that were very supportive of America. Now, we will talk about NATO in the next few other videos. So if we were talking about link, yes, differences in ideology, breakdown of wartime alliance, as well as the division of Europe did lead to Cold War. Alright, again, recap what is Cold War. Cold War is tense relations, competing fiercely, and they compete in many areas. Okay, so these are the three main points. Ideological conflict led to fear, and that is why, as a result of their differing ideologies, that's the reason the mistrust did lead to specifically um, um, a very weak alliance to even begin with. And once they don't trust each other, they continue to view each other with suspicion, and it didn't help because they would then break any wartime alliance. And there was, of course, the division of Europe, which was the result of mistrust. And all of these points led to Cold War being inevitable. So based on this could be your possible link. So moving on, you can see we have covered the end of World War II and its impact on Europe. We have also covered growing mistrust between USA and Soviet Union. In the next video, we will look at the superpower rivalry and what does it mean? How did it contribute to the reasons for Cold War?